everybody. Welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson. Wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon or evening. And as is the case, because I'm recording this on the 12th of December, a Merry Christmas. And this may well go out in the new year, but I hope that everybody, when they do have listened to this, has had a wonderful Christmas, a safe Christmas, a busy one for some, a quieter one for others, as our year comes to an end. And another year on the podcast as well. And a great episode today. To sort of bring potentially the recording of the podcast certainly to a close this year. We're going to be welcoming a guest who has not joined us on the podcast before, but I'll tell you what, instead of going through the introduction about what we're going to be speaking about, why don't we just get our guest on and dive straight into it? We'll do things a little bit differently today. My guest today is the Managing Director of London-based brand experience agency Chorus. Joins us today from their base in Southwest London. It is their Managing Director, Andrew Perrott. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Afternoon, James. Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
And thanks for joining us. As I said, from your base in Southwest London, in the lovely part of the world in Fulham, I believe. Thanks for joining us. And as I said, London-based brand experience agency Chorus. But I suppose maybe the first thing to get off the bat here, particularly in light of something that we're going to be talking about, is even though you're London-based, it's very much you're a global agency. You're working on stuff internationally, particularly at the moment.
Yes, indeed. So we are London-based, as you say, but we do deliver globally. We're very lucky to work with a number of our brands in a global capacity. So very few of our clients happen to be based in London, which isn't by design necessarily, just more organically. That's how things have turned out. But I've just got back from Singapore. We delivered a brand experience. A few weeks prior to that, we were in Sydney. We've got events coming up sort of immediately the new year in Dublin, North America, as well as around the UK and continental Europe. So we're very fortunate. It's lovely to be back and complaining about air traffic control and baggage delays and things like that, I have to say.
Yeah, and of course global logistics, which is another thing that we all had to sort of park for I don't know, to 12 to 18 months or so, wasn't it? Global logistics, and no doubt that's playing a part in some of the productions that you've had on in the last few months.
Indeed, and it's a delight to have the problems. I have to say, I know many of us through lockdown learned a lot of lessons. I don't know if you could turn the tap back on. I don't know if I'd ever want to go back to the amount of travel we were doing prior to 2020, but it's certainly nice to be back and around and out and about in all the different markets.
Absolutely. I'm not sure whether or not we can name check. I think there was a press release that went out about the job that you were working on in Singapore, which for context, everybody, we're recording this on the 12th of December. So 5 days ago, there was an event that went live in Singapore that Chorus were very much behind. Before I shout the name out, I'll just check, Andrew, that we can mention the client.
I haven't expressly asked permission, but I'm sure it wouldn't be a problem at all.
Okay, well, we shall say a global drinks brand.
I'm happy because I think it's relevant in the context if we want to talk about it. One of our clients is Diageo, and we're very fortunate to work with a number of their brands, and one of them being Johnnie Walker. We've worked across the trademark for a number of years, but they have a luxury a product within their range, which is the Johnnie Walker Blue Label whiskey.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And there's a real push behind that, both this year going into next year. I believe, I can't say this as fact, but I believe it is now the fastest growing whiskey in the luxury sector. Some of the team mentioned to me the other day, which is fantastic news. But it is the Blue Label, and that's relevant because of the challenge to us was how to work with a luxurious brand that might be relatively new to that world, and we're part of that process of positioning them as a luxury icon, and that's really informed the creative.
Mm-hmm. And the reason that we mention that is because one of the things that we had hoped to talk to Andrew about on today's podcast is what does the next wave of events look like, and we've already alluded to the fact that a lot of people don't would never want things to go back to fully the way they were, pre-pandemic, because of all of the stuff that we've learned and all of the things that we've now been able to do. Could call it in a more streamlined fashion, I suppose, post-pandemic, as we've all gone back to live events. And something that I picked out in reading the information that was sent to me ahead of the podcast today is we've all heard of immersive experiences, and that phrase was used to describe the Johnnie Walker event that you put on. But when I was reading about the approach that you have to productions, Andrew, and I suppose the ethos that underpins what you're doing as an agency, is this approach to, I suppose, like a theatrical element to the productions. We've all heard of what immersive experiences are. We've all seen brand activations on a simplistic level. But I'm curious to sort of tap into a little bit about your thinking behind how you bring some of these theatrical production elements into something like an immersive brand experience for a drink like Johnnie Walker.
I suppose that in response to that, the first thing around immersive experiences is, as you say, it's very prevalent at the moment, and I think we're now dealing with such an educated audience that I'm sure you perhaps have shared my experience where we've felt a little let down at times, where you've attended something that's been promoted as a genuinely immersive or experiential event, and it perhaps hasn't quite reached the expectation of an audience, and that's for, from my perspective as an audience member for public ticketed shows and things like that. And I just think your theatricality and what we bring to that, we have an internal working term about radical creative, and that's really just a bit of a North Star, and to keep ourselves always trying to think of something that is genuinely going to be a slightly different or removed from what the obvious answer to any particular brief or project might be. And I think that sense of the theatre involved is what can create the experience. It doesn't need to rely on a venue. It doesn't need to rely on no natural light. It doesn't need to rely on a 3mm pitch LED screen or HD content. It's the idea, I suppose, and it's living and dying by the idea is the ethos that we try and bring to that. And therefore, if you make a claim that you're doing something that's going to have an impact on an audience, then within a reasonable expectation of what you're working on, we'd like to think we can deliver that.
And it's interesting just reading some of the more sort of specific details, I suppose, about the production element of the activation over in Singapore. It is I'm reading here, 3D audio soundscape designed using cutting edge binaural sound design techniques, and I'm just thinking, straight away that comes down to one of the oldest sort of tricks in the theatrical book of accompanying music, a soundtrack to encourage emotion and to provoke emotion. We see it in film, we see it in theatre, we see it in musical theatre, and I guess that's one of the sort of the oldest techniques in the book, isn't it, to bring sound to enhance another experience?
Yeah, very much. And I know it can all get wordy, doesn't it? It doesn't exactly trip off the tongue when you start trying to describe some of these elements, but that's exactly it. And again, using that example as a case study, when the brief was to genuinely change the execution of a luxury brand experience for a drinks brand. And whilst there are many excellent examples done by some fabulous agencies around the world, we wanted to bring a slightly unique take, particularly around obviously the brand story and the credentials that we were working with. And of course, it makes any agency's life much easier when the core product or the core brand or service is excellent anyway. But I think what we tried to do there with the theatre cues is we genuinely wanted to be sensorial. So if we were going to say or do something around audio, it really needed to be genuinely unique and interesting and relevant and have a purpose and a reason for doing it. And in that particular case, the soundscape that we have landed with, and we worked with a fabulous editor, it really does take you emotionally to another place.
Mm.
And that is all part of the journey that someone goes through. And for that particular experience, it's about 20 minutes long. And the intention is to quite genuinely try and take people out of their immediate present and sort of transcend their environment and take them to somewhere that they feel a connection with what's going on. And as you say, theatrical cues are the way to hopefully achieve that.
And of course, I suppose in some respects as well, that's one of the key elements to provoking a long-term experience as well. It's not just about that 20 minutes that they're experiencing there, but the experience is one that within that 20 minutes is effectively locking something into that person's sort of psyche in a way that then associates all of those senses and that experience with that particular drink. And that's not just for that drink. I guess that goes with any client that you're working with when you're looking to create an experience that ties their brand in with a maybe something in a short amount of time, but for a longer term impact.
Oh, absolutely. And in a commercial environment, we're trying to create brand advocates and brand fans. So we're hoping the experience is genuinely entertaining and quite sincerely something the audience wasn't expecting and makes an impact and sort of get some attention and create some some interest. But ultimately, what the measurement of success of that is for that audience to hopefully have learned something and then apply that understanding to their consumer choices. In that environment, we're working with consumer brands. The ultimate aim is to recruit fans for the brand who, by learning something in a way that has been genuinely impactful, they retain that information, then have a closer association with whichever brand we're working with.
And is the brief? I'm always curious to ask agencies such as yourselves that have such a strong sort of bond with a creative, a dynamic creative approach to events for their clients, is how clear the initial brief is that you get. How clear an idea does the client have in terms of what they want to deliver and build, and where they want how they want their brand associated with particular marketplaces? If the brief is too strict, I'm guessing, does that stifle creativity sometimes from your point of view?
I think it can be varied, and I think, in all honesty, it probably reflects the closeness and the longevity of the relationship. So we have noticed, and particularly the last couple of years coming out of all the lockdowns where everything was sort of thrown up in the air and almost started again to some degree. We've got what, again, a throwaway internal term we use is a blank page brief. And we do find, and this has happened on several occasions in the last 12 months, where a brand that we have known and we've worked with, or a corporate client, they have called us up and have said, we know we want to activate something in the next 6, 12, 18 months. We're not entirely sure what purpose, platform, or scope that might look like. But we know we've got a bit of a campaign and we know what we'd like to achieve. And we often come in and then we will construct with them what falls out of that. And then that will then form the brief. Very rarely at the moment do we receive a brief of Project X for a certain number of people in a certain location for a certain budget. It seems to be far more nuanced than that. And I think the other element that I've certainly noticed is we tend to be brought in on multiple agency situations, far more. We're often briefed at the same time as the digital agency or the above the line agency or the out of home agency. And certainly in my experience anyway, that wasn't necessarily the case a few years ago. We would, the above the line campaign would be well and truly set in stone and perhaps even underway before how that was going to activate in a third space would be thought of. Whereas now we're right up front, which is fabulous for us because we sort of get to have an opinion and curate part of what becomes our brief, which is a very fortunate position to be in.
And you become a key stakeholder then in terms of how I suppose the genesis of some of those ideas may come to fruition. If you can work hand in hand with the other key elements of that overall strategy, then instead of coming into the party further down the line, as was the case when, agencies were, first looked at, as you said, sometimes marketing campaigns, ad campaigns, things like that, they're already well up and running, and effectively you would have to tailor what you're doing to in effect suit what was already being put out there as a message, where I guess you have that ability to work with these people now at an earlier stage. You can maybe give some of your live event ideas which can shape then how other elements of the campaign are going to go.
Oh, most definitely. And I am not, and we are not marketeers. We're not an advertising or a PR agency by any means. But I think one thing I've noticed again is, following the consumer trends that we've all seen over the last sort of number of years, consumers are buying into and supporting brands or products or firms or entities that they really share a belief in, and it's a two-way street. And how we see that manifest in a tangible way is we will often be involved in a strategic setup circumstance where the end client, the end brand or entity, will know how crucial their experiential activation is, even though the live audience reach may be relatively finite or modest. The content that we take from the third space and live activation, that is obviously then wrapped up and becomes an authentic mouthpiece for a bigger message. So the content from the live activation can often be a very, very important intrinsic part of the wider positioning that the end client is intending.
Sure.
So it's been quite an interesting change in how we work, that we're far more integrated into the bigger picture than perhaps we were 5 years ago, say.
And I don't know if it might be a slight digression, but just, one of my initial responses to that is the world of influencers on social media and platforms like Instagram, particularly, where, I've seen examples where the initial event that has perhaps been hosted by a brand for celebrities and influencers has been recorded, and elements of that footage have then been used in the further advertising of it. So that activation had to come, as part of the initial phase of the campaign, in order to create the assets and the content that is required for the campaign further down the line. So the use of influencers and celebrities, I suppose, particularly with consumer brands, is very much a driving factor, I guess, behind some of you guys being involved at that earlier stage.
Yeah, most definitely. It's all part of the same play these days, and particularly around digital as well. So quite often we will be briefed in tandem with a digital agency. This is obviously more related to consumer brands.
Sure,
and
yeah.
brands. But I think again, I've found that hugely beneficial. Because again, we don't claim to be a digital agency, and those that we've worked with in a partnership model with our end clients have all been brilliant at what they do, but we all work at very different timelines. So it's really important that, and I think that the most successful executions have benefited from us having a conversation very early in the process of, when will a digital rollout be able to go live, and that may be 6-9 months down the line. Well, that will then inform what we think we should be doing in third space, and where we should absolutely be activating to a live audience and sharing content, and become one part of one overarching kind of piece of content that's seeded through all of our different channels.
I want to go back, if I may, to the core of the business, and to Chorus itself and how you operate, and just ask really whether or not this creative always being the king, the theatrical elements of the production, all of those sort of that side of things, has did the company start with that ethos, or has it developed to create that? Was it something that from the moment you started the company, you knew this is what I wanted to have?
Yes, I mean we haven't really created it. I think it just reflects the people involved. So where we often talk about the theatrical sensibilities of the agency, and we have in-house creative and technical production, as well as the producers and project lead, project management. It comes from the experience of the individuals involved. Many of us are from theatrical background. We started in
Right.
theatre, or we started at rock and roll touring, or film or television production. Some people are ex-performers, in front of as well as behind the camera. And I think it's just that sort of collective experience that we bring that approach. And we've all many of us have had long and winding roads, in our personal careers, and we've all come to a live event and / creative agency model with that theatrical background, and that's what tends to, I still think, inform everybody's instinct and natural opinion. And I mentioned before, we like to think that we still retain a bit of a theatrical production company atmosphere. When I worked in theatre, you'd do touring shows for 3 or 6 months, and there was a real bond between those individuals, both the cast, the talent, and the crew. And I think we don't try and create that. I think that exists, but we're careful to try and protect and enhance and encourage that as well. So that's what I talk about when I say theatrical state of mind.
And I guess when we bring it all back to the experience that the attendee is gaining from something like this, is anybody, if you're a theatre lover, that feeling of walking into the stalls and taking your seat and the lights going down. If you're a live music person, walking into the venue, be it an arena or a small club, and the lights go down, that moment that you get, that 5 seconds, just as they're going down, and that anticipation of the first chord being hit, or the first note being struck up by the orchestra, the first actor walking on stage and delivering the first line in scene 1, whatever that may be, that anticipation as the audience member, as the attendee, if we can translate that into an experiential event, into a corporate event, into a consumer-facing event, regardless of what it is, if we can just capture that 5 seconds of anticipation, I think you've probably done your job right, haven't you?
Oh, we should hire you as a spokesperson. That's precisely what we stand for, and that is absolutely it. I mean, I couldn't put it anywhere any better than that. And that's the spirit of it. For us as a group of individuals, of what we just honestly think and mean and want to achieve. And then when you apply that to an agency environment, I guess where that becomes tangible is we're storytellers, and it's all about communicating either a piece of information or an emotion or a personality, and you break that down through great scripting, great lighting, great cues, great direction, great audio, etc., great content. And I think that's precisely where we would like to think we sit. And it's interesting because we have, and we're very lucky enough to have quite diverse client roster. We work with corporate clients, media, consumer brands, which is, as we've been talking around, luxury brands. And I think the common thread, and this is how I would introduce us perhaps to somebody who we hadn't worked with before, is the common thread is that storytelling. So we often get approached when it's about making a mark on an audience. And that's lovely that people think of us in that way, but that is hopefully what we can bring to a project.
Absolutely. For some reason, this again is random. Some of the stuff that pops into your head when you do the podcast regularly, and you're listening to somebody, and you've got a particular subject in your mind. Things pop into your head that you haven't thought of for years, and something just popped into my head, and it was it was the ET ride in Universal Studios in Disney years ago. And I'm going back probably 25, maybe even 30 years now, to when I was not even quite a teenager, I don't think. And I guess that's sort of one of my earliest examples that I can think of, that I can reference, of an experience.
Mm.
Going out there and seeing how they did things, how they translated, a 2-hour movie into a 6 or 7 minute experience that put you in the heart of the action. I just suddenly remembered, as you were speaking then, that experience I got of, if anybody can remember it at all, if anybody ever went to it, you got on a bike exactly like the kids in the film did. The lights went down, you were in like a big shed, and then suddenly the lights went down and you could feel movement, but you couldn't see what was happening. Then the lights came, and for 6 or 7 minutes you were basically placed right in the center of that movie.
Yeah.
And you came out the other side with an experience that clearly has lasted with me, because even though I've not thought of it in years, that conversation that you and I are having has suddenly provoked that memory from 1992, I think it was, when I went there. And that's exactly what we were talking about, 15 minutes ago, is sowing a seed in there that maybe years later or months later, it, invokes that memory.
Absolutely. And job well done. And hopefully when you were in that experience, you went back to being in your local cinema with your parents, or on your sofa at home in your pajamas, allowed to stay up late and watch it on television, or whatever your childhood experience was. And that's it. And there's no, it's not a coincidence that so many of the real cut through experiences at the moment are connected with that sort of filmic storytelling, like the Stranger Things activation that's happening at the moment, and there's many of them, and some of them are absolutely brilliant. One project we're working with at the moment is we work with Mont Blanc on a global level, and we are in the process of designing a global toolkit for both off-site and in-boutique activations around an upcoming product launch that they have in 2023, which I obviously can't mention. However, that same artist has an existing immersive experience which is currently rolling out around some of the big galleries in the world. And again, it doesn't necessarily just need to be about Hollywood film creation. It's about it's taking that ethos and applying it. And the other trend that you could tie into that is the collaborations of the world. And so many of the big brands are really tying themselves to productions or talent or shows or artists, again, as a way into providing that experience. How does a again, we're talking about consumer brands, but how does a brand try and give a member of the public a genuinely affecting moment? Because so many brands can end up just talking to themselves. The consumers aren't interested in just being sold to, particularly younger demographic these days. So there needs to be a collaboration and an angle, some way to giving them an authoritative way of having an opinion, and that collaboration through cult and cult references, media references, is a way to give more brands and more clients a voice.
Well, art is an interesting one, if I may touch on that a second, because I've seen a few art installations just in the last 12 months, but I think 3 examples that are tapping into the fact that from a technology point of view, people are better equipped. And have taken advantage of the fact that everybody's got an iPhone, and a lot of people generally have a pair of headphones or some AirPods or something in their pocket a lot of the time now. And I'm loving how art installations now becoming much more accessible in some respects, and I know that that's translating right from the lowest end of your local art gallery right up to sort of significant art installations in globally recognized institutions, whereby they are not just a space where people walk around and talk quietly anymore and look at the artwork that's in there. They themselves are becoming real sort of immersive experiences, aren't they? Because you can do so much now, just even with the basic technology that people are carrying in their pockets.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a passive experience is very hard to really make an impact these days. I mean, that's not to, if we're talking about art, that's not to take away the joy of attending an exhibition of someone whose work you admire. But if it's you bring it back to our world of how we interpret art as an experiential agency, it needs to be a conversation, a two-way street. And we feel very strongly, and we talk to our clients about this all the time. And we feel very strongly that an emerging trend is immersive experiences that people co-create.
Right.
And I think just to be in a space and feel transported is one thing, and done well, it's beautiful and very impactful. But we really do feel that taking the arts as a steer and as a North Star, being able to co-create and contribute to the art or the environment around you is going to be something that I think we'll be seeing a lot more of. And you'll see that there's an awful lot of, again, coming back to the collab topic, there's an awful lot of global household name brands in every possible industry who are connecting with an artist, some well known, some not so well known. But again, it's a way of giving that brand a voice in a topic that perhaps it would feel slightly strange if it just came out and had an opinion on something. Whereas through a collaboration, through aligning themselves with a particular artist and an approach, it means that they can then talk on perhaps some more wider societal topics or whatever points or purposes they want to talk about.
Sure, yeah, and I guess it's driven in some part perhaps by consumers. Well, not just consumers, but in the business world, people being less easily fooled by traditional methods, I suppose, if that makes sense, is that you have to be a little bit more articulate, a little bit more on point with your sort of, your social message that you're putting out there when you're trying to promote a brand or a product or something. It can't be the advertising of 25, 30 years ago anymore. If you're looking to get a message or a brand across to somebody or a product, it has to be a little bit more tapped into the sort of the modern way of thinking, which is why there is a need and a desire maybe to go and engage with some of these artists, be them musical, be them in a traditional sense, whatever they may be.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people want to know what you stand for, way beyond the product or the service or the entity that the end client might be. And the added layer of that now is, which I think is a very healthy thing, is there's a very, as I said before, the audience is very educated, and there's a very healthy cynicism to brand messaging. And you can see if you take something like sustainability, where so much of perhaps what was the initial generation of that has been exposed as greenwashing, really. Now if a corporate or a brand is going to have a stance and have something to say, it had better stand up to scrutiny, and it needs to be authentic and sincere. And the way to try and communicate something honestly is to perhaps have a third party validate you, as opposed to just a brand talking to an audience which already feels ancient history, even if it was only a few years ago.
Absolutely. If I may, but we're getting towards the end of time here, but I just wanted to touch very briefly, if I could, on the technical aspects of actually delivering the actual events and experiences that you will spend, no doubt, weeks, months, years sometimes planning, creating. Has the technology, the hardware side of things and the developments there, and I'm talking about traditional things like the availability now of really, really good quality, high definition LED screen, higher quality sound systems that are available in smaller packages, so you can be a little bit more discreet in terms of how they're set up and configured. The way things are operated remotely, using things like iPads, where you need to have a console 12 feet wide, years ago. Have the advances in hardware allowed a company like yours to actually be even more creative because of how you can design a physical space?
Absolutely, and it evolves so quickly and it moves at such a pace. You need to proactively try and stay in touch with all of the developments. I think the first thing is just simple commerce. Very very complex technology has become affordable and viable. So there is now that you can use something that perhaps a few years ago would have been unaffordable or out of budget for a lot of projects. The other thing I would say that's probably had its biggest impact is that much of this new technology is universally available. Mm-hmm. So again, we do a lot of global design where perhaps we're designing a concept that we might stage the pilot, but may not necessarily stage the subsequent events in different parts of the world.
I see.
We've always been very sensitive to create something that you could deliver in Kuala Lumpur as well as Johannesburg or wherever it might be. So I think that universal availability is a huge step forward. And also becoming user friendly. You look at the advances in wearable AR just in the last couple of years. Suddenly it's not cumbersome. Suddenly it's not a barrier to entry. It's something that you can incorporate with a live audience without it feeling clunky or it becoming overly expensive. So, I mean, it's everything moves so fast, but I think it's making it accessible for as many people as possible is probably the biggest change that I've noticed.
Absolutely, yeah, and that translates right the way down. Going back to something that you and I, said just off air when we were just having a little bit of a conversation pre-podcast about audiences and who might be listening to this. I think things at the top end of the industry absolutely do translate down to large, medium, smaller, even 10, 20 people events now. The technology that's available, and even referencing back a few weeks ago, medium-sized Event Tech Live that I work on at Excel in London, because wireless headsets are now completely and readily available, and we've had them there for years so that people can just put a headset on and listen to the conference content on the show floor without the need to have loud PA boxes. We now have a second channel set up with a translator sat on the other end of a Zoom screen, relaying a live interpretation into the second channel of the headset. So we had a delegation from Spain visit. They put on a set of headsets, flicked it to the other channel, and they were able to watch a session with a live translator giving them the translation. We were able to do the same via a technology platform, but put closed captions on a screen, just using an algorithm through this platform that spits back out the text straight onto a screen, fully branded. And I mean, just simple things like that, and that translates right down to 20 or 30 person business meetings now that use, digital Q&A technology to allow remote attendees to pose questions and things like that. I think that the technology that we use at the top end quickly translates right the way through the industry.
Oh, absolutely. And the output of all of that is you don't really notice the technology, or if it's done well, you don't really notice the technology anymore. Yeah. It's just inherently integrated in what you're doing. And as you say, that doesn't need to be a global film premiere. It can be, day-to-day working events. Everyone benefits from the functionality of the technology, but it's not it's not a faff. It's not hard to use. It's not difficult to provide instructions. It's multilingual, all those sorts of things. And it just becomes second nature. And that's when technology really is working. When you don't notice it, it's used correctly.
Absolutely. We are we're towards the end of time on today's podcast. It's 40 minutes or so has flown past today with Andrew, talking about loads of different things. As I said at the top, Andrew Perrott is the managing director of London-based brand experience agency Chorus. We've been talking to them about some of the stuff that they've been working on with Johnnie Walker Blue, specifically the premium Johnnie Walker brand, and the activation that is ongoing at the moment out in Singapore, but by the time you listen to this, will have happened, will have taken place. And no doubt, Andrew, you will have had the results of that and feedback and debriefs from the client by then.
Yes, I believe it closes tomorrow, and touch wood, everything's gone to plan so far. So we'll look forward to showing some feedback and some KPIs on that, and doing some promotion around it next year.
Yeah, and watch out for on Event Industry News. I'm sure if there's any news and if it's made public through Andrew's channels and through Chorus's channels, then no doubt that'll be picked up. And keep your eye on Event Industry News, perhaps in the new year for any sort of follow up from that particular project. Would be really interested to hear how that went and maybe get a bit more detailed info specifically on that project that the people of Event Industry News can read on the website at some point next year, Andrew.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for having me, James.
Not a problem at all. Before we go, we should allow you the opportunity to maybe give some blatant plugging for Chorus. If people want to want to find out a little bit more about the company, what you're up to, presumably social media, you're out on there, and website, things like that.
Absolutely. The website is chorus.london, and you'll find us on all the usual channels. So yes, please do look us up if it's of interest.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. And on the subject of websites, eventindustrynews.com is the place to go. If you're listening to the podcast today on your podcast platform, don't forget to head over to eventindustrynews.com, where you can check out the latest news features, supplements, the A to Z supplier directory, and of course, video versions of all of our podcasts. Of course, if you are already watching the video version of today's podcast, thank you very much for joining us. Have a little look around eventindustrynews.com whilst you are here on the website. And don't forget as well that you can go in the opposite direction and you can find audio versions of all the podcasts on wherever you get your podcasts from. Just search for Event Industry News, hit subscribe, and you can listen to all of the latest versions as and when they drop. And of course, all the previous editions that we've done now. Crikey, 2023 is looming on me, so I'm never quite sure how long we've been at this racket for, but I'm guessing it's got to be at least sort of 7 or 8 years now that we've been doing the podcast. So thanks to everybody as always who tunes in and listens to this regularly. As always, we welcome your input, your thoughts, your comments. At Event News Blog on Twitter is where you'll get Event Industry News on Twitter. And of course, if you want to engage with us on any of the other social media platforms, just search for Event Industry News and you will find us. Which brings us neatly to the end of today's episode of the podcast. Our thanks once again to Mr. Andrew Perrott from Chorus for joining us from their base in Fulham in southwest London. Andrew, very Merry Christmas to you. Thanks for joining the podcast and good luck with the remainder of the activation over in Singapore. We look forward to catching up with what the company's been up to in the new year.
Many thanks. Safe and happy Christmas to you as well, James. Thanks again.
Tune in next time, everybody. See you soon. Bye-bye.